He signed in using the name Peter Bergman, Bergmann. Some countries use one N, others use two. The indications are that Austrian nationals use two N's.
In 2009, a man arrived at a bus station in Ireland with no luggage and a name that did not exist. He spent his final days methodically scrubbing every trace of his life away before walking into the Atlantic. He thought he had designed the perfect exit from the world, and for nearly a decade, he seemed to have succeeded. But now, the mystery that is Peter Bergman has finally been solved, and what was found is quite the head-scratcher. The discovery at Dead Man's Point. Early in the morning on June 16, 2009, Arthur Kinsella and his son Brian arrived at Ross's Point in County Sligo for a triathlon training session. The time was about 6:15 a.m., and a thick mist hung over the coast as Brian prepared to enter the water. While walking along the shore, Arthur noticed a shape resting on a patch of sand that the tide had recently uncovered. The object was lying face down near a set of rocks at the back of the beach. At first glance, Arthur thought it was a plastic mannequin that someone had left there as a joke, but as he walked closer, he realized it was actually the body of a man. The man was tall and thin with gray hair and appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s. Brian came out of the water to join his father, and they both noticed that the man was very pale and his skin felt cold. There were no visible injuries or blood and no signs of a struggle on his body. Before calling for help, the two men took a moment to say a prayer over the stranger. At 6:45 a.m., Sergeant Terry McMahon from the Sligo Garda station arrived at the beach to start the official investigation. The sergeant noticed there were no footprints around the body except for the ones made by the Kinsellas, which suggested the man had been in the water and was washed onto the shore by the tide. The man was wearing a navy blue t-shirt and black brief-style underwear, with a second pair of striped swim briefs worn underneath. His shirt was tucked neatly into his underwear, which was a very strange detail for someone who had drowned. Nearby on a flat rock, the police found the rest of his clothing, including a black leather jacket, navy chinos, a black sleeveless vest, and black shoes with dark socks. Everything was folded into a very neat pile, which showed the man had placed them there with great care before entering the ocean. Sergeant McMahon searched the pockets of the jacket and pants looking for a wallet, passport, or any form of identification, but he found nothing. The investigation took a strange turn when the police looked closer at the clothes and realized every single identifying mark had been removed. Every brand name and size tag had been cut or torn out of the fabric with precision. This was not a typical accident involving a local swimmer, as it looked like someone had gone to extreme lengths to make sure that if his body was ever found, no one would know who he was. The police were left with a man who had no name and no past, but they soon found a trail that led them to a local hotel, and what they found there only deepened the mystery. The art of disappearing. When Sergeant McMahon looked at the items left on the rock at Ross's Point, he did not see the belongings of a man who had gone for a frantic or accidental swim. Everything was laid out with a level of care that was almost haunting. Every item of clothing apparently belonging to the John Doe had been folded into a neat, tight pile. In police work, the way a scene is left often tells you about the person's state of mind. This was the work of someone who was calm, collected, and entirely in control of his final moments. It was too deliberate, almost like he knew he was not coming back to claim his things. And the fact that every tag on his clothing was surgically removed did not help the case at all. Such a thing is not something a normal traveler does. It is a very famous tactic used by people who want to stay invisible. It is often called the scrubbed identity. This same detail was famously found in the case of the Isdal woman in Norway back in 1970. In that case and this one, the goal was to make it impossible for anyone to trace the clothes back to a specific shop or country. This kind of behavior is a hallmark of intelligence operatives or people with military training who are taught how to disappear. Because there were no tags, the police had to rely on the information the man provided at the Sligo City Hotel. He had checked in using the name Peter Bergmann, but that quickly proved to be a dead end. When the authorities contacted the Austrian police, they found no record of a Peter Bergmann matching his age and description. He was a ghost in the system, And even more confusing was the address he wrote in the hotel guest book. He listed his home as Einstedersen, 15 Vine, 4472, Wien. At first, this looked like a real location because Wien is the German word for Vienna. However, the details were a complete fabrication. The street name Wein does not exist in Vienna. Furthermore, the linguistic structure of the word Einstedersen is not quite right for the German language. It looked like a jumble of sounds meant to mimic a real European location. The biggest mistake, or perhaps the cleverest lie, was the postcode. He wrote 4472, but postcodes in Vienna only go from 1010 up to 1901. There was no way this address could lead back to a real house or a real life. He had handed the hotel staff a map to a place that existed only in his head. Every step he took was designed to send the police down a path that led nowhere, leaving them to wonder how a man could walk through a modern city while leaving absolutely no trace of his true self behind. 3 days in Sligo, the CCTV timeline. The investigation into Peter Bergman's past did not start on the beach, but at the Sligo bus station. The Gardaí checked the CCTV footage from the surrounding area, which helped them to track his arrival to Friday, June 12th. He had boarded a bus in Derry, Northern Ireland at 4 p.m. and arrived in Sligo at 6:28 p.m. In the video, he looked completely unremarkable. He was carrying a black shoulder bag and a laptop bag, fitting in perfectly with the other commuters and tourists. He walked with a steady pace and showed no signs of distress or confusion. From the bus station, he headed straight to the Sligo City Hotel, which was a short walk away. He chose the Sligo City Hotel for a very specific reason. At the time, it was one of the few places that did not strictly enforce the law regarding checking government identification for guests. He was able to check into room 405 and pay for his 3-night stay entirely in cash. He paid €65 per night and kept his interactions with the staff very brief. Those who spoke to him said he was polite but distant. He had a strong accent that sounded German or Austrian, but he did not engage in small talk. He obviously wasn't there to make friends or see the sights, but to execute a plan that had clearly been months in the making. During his second day in town, Saturday, he was spotted on camera heading toward the local post office. This is where the story takes another strange turn. He was seen purchasing a specific set of international stamps worth 82 euro cents each. While the cameras showed him buying the stamps, he was never seen actually mailing a letter or a package. This has led to many theories about what he was doing. Some believe he sent a final set of instructions or a farewell letter to someone back home. Others think he may have been using a dead drop, a classic spy technique where information is left in a secret location to be picked up by someone else. Whatever he did with those stamps, the recipients have never come forward. As the weekend progressed, his movements remained steady and calculated. He spent a lot of time walking the streets of Sligo, often stopping to read the poetry of William Butler Yeats that is etched into the walls of the town buildings. He seemed to be taking in the culture of the area one last time. Despite being surrounded by people in a busy town, he remained completely solitary. He was a man living on a countdown, and as Sunday arrived, he began to narrow his focus toward the water. The Purple Bag Mystery. The most baffling part of the Peter Bergman mystery, interestingly, did not happen on the beach, but in the busy streets of Sligo town. While the man appeared to be a typical tourist to the casual observer, the hotel security footage told a much darker and more calculated story. Over the 3 days he stayed at the Sligo City Hotel, the cameras captured him leaving the building exactly 13 times. Each time he stepped out of the lobby, he was carrying a purple plastic bag. The bag was always full, appearing heavy with unknown items. Yet, every single time he returned to the hotel, the bag was gone. Sometimes he would walk back with his hands visibly empty, and other times the purple bag was folded up small and tucked into his pocket. This repetitive behavior created what investigators called a surveillance loop. He was systematically transporting his belongings out of his hotel room and disposing of them across the town. To the police, this was a clear sign of a man who was cleaning out his life. He was making sure that when he finally left for the shore, there would be nothing left in his room to identify him. No laptop, extra clothes, letters, and any personal effects. He was peeling away the layers of his existence, one bag at a time. However, as the Gardaí began to pull footage from the hundreds of public CCTV cameras scattered throughout Sligo, they hit a wall that made no sense. Sligo is a modern town with cameras on almost every street corner, outside every shop, and near every public bin. Logic dictates that if a man walks around a small town 13 times to throw things away, a camera will eventually catch him doing it. But Peter Bergmann was different. He performed a total vanishing act. Despite being tracked across town on various cameras, not once was he filmed actually placing an item into a trash can. He seemed to have a mental map of the entire city's surveillance network. He would walk down a main road in full view, turn a sharp corner into a narrow alley or a blind spot, and emerge a few minutes later without the bag. This level of precision is incredible. It suggests that he didn't just walk around randomly, but likely scouted the town beforehand to find the gaps in the security net. He knew exactly where the lenses were pointing and where they weren't. This is the kind of high-level counter-surveillance usually seen in professional intelligence work. He treated the town of Sligo like a puzzle, finding every hole in the system to ensure his secrets stayed buried. The Gardaí did not take this lightly. They launched a massive forensic search to find those purple bags. They knew that if they could find just one item, maybe a prescription bottle, receipt, or something, the mystery of Peter Bergman would be over. They spent weeks combing through every public trash bin in the town center. When that failed, they went even further. They moved the search to the regional landfill, where tons of local waste are processed. Teams of officers spent hours sifting through mountains of garbage, looking for anything tied to the man in room 405. They found absolutely nothing. The search was an exhaustive failure that only showed how meticulous his planning had been. Whether he used private bins or destroyed them in a way the police couldn't track, he successfully erased his physical history. By the time Monday morning arrived, the man who called himself Peter Bergman was a clean slate. He was finally ready for his final journey to the water, leaving the police with 13 empty loops of film and a growing sense of dread. The final journey to the shore. On the afternoon of Monday, June 15th, the man checked out of the Sligo City Hotel for the last time. He walked to the local bus station, where he sat down for what would be his final meal. He ordered a cappuccino and a ham and cheese sandwich. While sitting there, the security cameras caught a very small but important moment. He took out a piece of paper and a pen and began to write. He spent several minutes looking at the paper as if he were proofreading a final message or a set of instructions. Then, without any hesitation, he tore the paper into tiny pieces and threw them into a nearby bin. Earlier that day, he had already begun scouting for the perfect place to finish his journey. He had flagged down a local taxi driver and asked for a recommendation on the best place to go for a swim. He pointed to a specific spot on a map, but the driver told him that the area was better for surfing because the waves were too rough. Instead, the driver suggested Ross's Point. It was a more secluded and peaceful stretch of sand. The man agreed and took a quick trip out there to see it for himself. He didn't stay long, though. He just looked at the water, took in the view, and asked to be driven back to the bus station. He had found what he was looking for. At 2:40 p.m., he boarded the bus to Ross's Point. He was still wearing his black leather jacket and navy pants, which made him stand out among the other people on the beach who were dressed for the summer weather. Throughout the evening, several people saw him just walking back and forth along the shoreline with his pants rolled up and his shoes in his hand. The very last person to see him alive was a local resident at 11:50 p.m. In the pale moonlight, the witness saw the man wading into the water as the tide began to roll in. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the man who called himself Peter Bergman was gone, leaving the world to wonder why he went to such great lengths to erase himself before taking that final plunge. The autopsy's witness. When the body of the man calling himself Peter Bergman was taken to Sligo University Hospital, everyone expected a straightforward report. The assumption was simple. An unidentified man had walked into the sea and drowned. But as Dr. Clive Kilgallen began the post-mortem examination, the story took a sharp and tragic turn. The man on the table was not only a mystery, he was a walking medical miracle, though not in a good way. The autopsy revealed that Peter was dying long before he ever set foot in Sligo. The most shocking discovery was the sheer scale of the illness inside him. The man had advanced prostate cancer that had spread throughout his entire body. It was in his bones, chest, and his lungs. The tumors were so large and numerous that Dr. Kilgallen noted the man likely had only weeks, or perhaps even days, to live. This was more than a mild case of being unwell. His body was essentially riddled with disease. Anyone in his condition should have been in a hospital bed. Yet he had spent his final days walking miles through the streets of Sligo and across the sandy dunes of Ross's Point. Even more baffling was what was missing from his system. Usually, a patient with terminal bone cancer is on a heavy regimen of morphine or other strong painkillers just to function. The pain from such a condition is often described as unbearable. However, the toxicology reports came back clean. There were no painkillers or specialized cancer treatments in his blood. The only thing found in his pockets was a small packet of aspirin, but even that had not been swallowed. He was facing the end of his life in total unmedicated agony. Yet he remained calm and focused enough to systematically erase his identity and avoid every security camera in town. The biggest surprise of the investigation, however, was not even Peter's diagnosis. You see, despite being found on a beach, washed up by the tide, Peter did not drown. Dr. Kilgallen found no water in the man's lungs. There was no frothing at the mouth and no tissue damage that usually points to a death by submersion. Legally and scientifically, he was dry. The official cause of death was listed as acute cardiac arrest. His heart had simply stopped beating. There are a few ways this could have happened. One theory is a phenomenon called vagal inhibition. This occurs when a person enters very cold water, and the sudden shock to the nervous system causes the heart to stop instantly. It is almost like a broken heart, triggered by the environment. Another possibility is that the sheer emotional and physical stress of his situation finally became too much for his weakened heart to handle. He had gone to the beach with the clear intention of letting the ocean take him, but his body gave up before the water could do the job. He wanted to disappear into the depths, but instead, his heart stopped while he was likely still in the shallows. This freak twist of fate is the only reason his body remained on the shore to be found the next morning. If his heart had lasted just a few minutes longer, he might have drifted far out to sea and remained a ghost forever. Instead, he left the police with a medical mystery that proved he was a man running out of time, which only made the question of who he was even more urgent. The spy theory versus the human tragedy. Because of the way this man moved around Sligo, many people refused to believe he was just a regular civilian. The most popular theory for years was the intelligence hypothesis. This suggests that Peter was a former spy, perhaps linked to the BND in West Germany or even the old East German Stasi. His behavior certainly fit the profile. He showed a level of cold discipline that most people simply do not have. He didn't panic, didn't talk to anyone more than necessary, and he spent days methodically scrubbing his identity. His counter-surveillance movements were the biggest clue for those who believed in the spy theory. The fact that he managed to find the exact blind spots in the town's CCTV network while disposing of his belongings is something usually taught in high-level training camps. To a professional investigator, it looked like he was performing a final cleanup operation. In the world of espionage, if an agent is dying and wants to protect their organization or their past, they are trained to erase every link to their real life. Or so it is claimed. This would explain the removed clothing tags and the fake Austrian address. However, there is a very strong counter-argument to the spy theory. If a man was truly a high-level intelligence operative, why would he choose such a public way to go? Sligo is a small town where a tall, thin man with a German accent stands out immediately. A real spy would likely have access to much better ways to disappear than taking a public bus and checking into a hotel that has cameras in the lobby. Also, walking back and forth on a popular beach in the moonlight is a very visible way to spend your final hours. If the goal was total secrecy, Ross's Point was a risky choice. This leads to the more likely and more heartbreaking dignified death theory. When you look at the medical facts, the story stops being a thriller and starts being a tragedy. This was a man in the final stages of a horrific disease. He knew he had weeks to live and that the end would be filled with pain and hospital tubes. Instead of putting his family through the slow, agonizing process of watching him wither away, he chose to take control. In this light, his actions weren't about military secrets, but about love and mercy. Erasing his name, then, was an attempt to spare his family the burden of his death. He wanted to walk into the sea and leave no trace so that no one would ever have to come to Ireland to identify a body. He was trying to give himself a clean exit on his own terms, making sure the ending was exactly how he wanted it to be. The cold case years. After the investigation hit a dead end, Peter was finally laid to rest. On September 18, 2009, he was buried in an unmarked grave in the Sligo cemetery. The burial was a lonely affair, paid for by the Irish Health Service. There were no family members present to say a last word, and no headstone to mark where he lay. The only people who attended the funeral were the very men who had spent months trying to find out who he was. Sergeant Terry McMahon and the other investigators stood by the grave, offering a final sign of respect to a man they had never truly met. For a few years, the story stayed local, but then the internet discovered it. The turning point to the whole story happened with the release of a documentary titled The Last Days of Peter Bergman. It used the real hotel security footage and interviews with the people who saw him, turning the case into a global obsession. Suddenly, people from all over the world were watching the graining film of a thin man carrying purple bags through a small Irish town. The mystery of a man who worked so hard to erase himself touched something in the public. It became a viral sensation, leading to thousands of theories on message boards and social media. This led to a decade-long digital search. A massive community of internet sleuths began to pick apart every single detail of the case. They used the weird address he left behind, Einstedersen, and ran it through every database they could find. They searched through German, Austrian, and Swiss missing persons files, looking for anyone who matched his height, his age, and his distinct facial features. They contacted dental experts to look at his x-rays and clothing experts to see if they could identify where his coat was made, despite the missing tags. Despite millions of eyes on the case, the search remained a failure for over 10 years. Every lead ended in a brick wall. People found men who looked like him, but DNA tests or family members always proved them wrong. The Peter Bergman mystery became one of the most famous unsolved cases on the web, right alongside the Somerton Man. It seemed like the man had won. He had successfully stepped out of his life and into the earth without leaving a single real clue behind. He remained a ghost in an unmarked grave, while the rest of the world refused to stop looking for his name. The path to the truth. For over 15 years, the man in the unmarked grave has kept his secrets. But in the world of modern science, a name is not all that is needed to identify a person who otherwise cannot or does not want to be found. Just a look at their cells, and a person's history can be splayed before you. While the case of Peter Bergman remains officially unsolved as of early 2026, the tools to crack this mystery are finally in motion. The most likely way this story ends is through a process called investigative genetic genealogy. This is the same method that recently gave a name to the Somerton Man in Australia after 70 years of investigative failure. It works by taking the DNA left behind by the stranger and comparing it to massive public databases where people around the world share their family trees. Instead of looking for a direct match in a police file, scientists look for distant relatives, like a third cousin in Germany, a great-aunt in Austria, or a nephew he never met. By building these family trees from the outside in, investigators can slowly narrow down a single family line until they find a man who simply stopped calling home in 2009. Charities like Locate International are currently leading the charge to keep this search alive. They have launched renewed appeals, using interactive maps and living depictions of the man's face to reach people across Europe. They believe that somewhere in Germany or Austria, there is a house where a man's disappearance is still a painful question mark. Perhaps his family thinks he started a new life, or perhaps they have spent years wondering why he vanished. The breakthrough will likely come from a single person recognizing a nose, a chin, or a specific way he walked in those old hotel videos. When that day comes, the mystery of Peter Bergman will stop being an internet sensation and become a human one. We will finally understand why he chose Sligo, what he really mailed with those 8 stamps, and who he was trying to protect when he tore up his last note. Until then, he remains a symbol of a man who wanted to be forgotten, but whose story is too haunting for the world to let go. What are your thoughts on the matter? Why would a man who scrubbed every label from his clothes leave his face in front of every security camera in town? Was he actually trying to stay hidden, or was he waiting for someone specific to find him? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.